February 1943, Stalingrad. German forces encircled in the city sent their final message from the ruins of a former tractor factory and surrendered. The army, of which Adolf Hitler once said could storm the heavens, was no more. Defeat at Stalingrad marked the psychological turning point of the Second World War. But just 12 months earlier, soldiers of the Wehrmacht were eagerly awaiting the return of the new campaign season, confident that they would finally defeat Stalin's forces and return home victorious. What follows is a day-by-day account of the battle as told by the men who fought it, their experiences documented in never-before-heard letters written on the front line. It's through their words that we will experience the horrors of Stalingrad. By the spring of 1942, German troops had been in Russia for nearly a year. Since the launch of Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, they had advanced deep into the USSR, capturing and killing nearly 3 million Soviet soldiers. But their key objectives, the destruction of the Red Army and the capture of Moscow, remained out of reach, and the Soviet Union remained in the war. For German troops tasked with defeating Stalin's forces, failure hung heavy. But as winter turned to spring, optimism amongst the men started to return.
Thank goodness we're through with winter now. It's still cold at night, but otherwise it's nice, and the snow has almost completely disappeared. If you don't get another period of rain, the earth will soon be dry, and I think the offensive will start soon. All the signs point to that. Replacements are on the way, weapons and everything is rolling forwards. Well, the Russians will be in for a surprise. Until then, we'll hold out for a few more weeks.
After the setbacks of the winter of 1941, Hitler ordered a change of strategy. Moscow would no longer be the immediate focus. Instead, he would push south to destroy the Soviet troop concentrations forward of the Don and capture the resource-rich oil fields of the Caucasus, in a move that Hitler hoped would bring about the complete collapse of the Soviet war effort. German forces were, as a stepping stone, to eliminate a crucial armaments and transport hub on the Volga, the industrial city of Stalingrad. Scheduled for early summer, the campaign was codenamed Fall Blau. Despite Hitler's confidence, there were many within the German armed forces who knew that the upcoming campaign would not be an easy one.
The Russian is far from being beaten. My estimate is that the Russian can still produce 600 to 800 tanks per month. And in addition to that, he has all the equipment which the Americans are shipping in via Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. I'm of the opinion that we in Germany are probably producing 200 to 300 tanks per month. Of those, a good part is going to Africa, where they will face whatever the English and Americans can produce. What will be victorious? Will it be spirit, moral, and skill? Or will it be the mass of their industrial output and their human resources? We'll see the result of that equation very soon, probably already next year. If the latter wins, it's over for us.
Army Group South, under Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, was given the task of conducting the actual summer offensive. Initially, the northern wing of the Army Group was to capture the large city of Voronezh on the Don. Then advance southwards along the Don and encircle enemy forces, in cooperation with a second advance from the Kharkov area. In the third part of the operation, an advance to the Volga was to be made towards Stalingrad in order to neutralize it, or at least bring it within range of German artillery, denying the Soviets a vital supply line. The final phase of the operation envisaged an advance southwards across the Don to conquer the Caucasian oil fields near Maikop and Grozny, as well as Baku on the Caspian Sea. Much to the dismay of some German soldiers, they would be joined by men of other Axis nations, Hungary, Italy and Romania.
The Italians are generally useless, stinking lazy at work and have a big mouth. Everywhere they go, they suffer one defeat after another. The Germans then have the honor of reconquering the lost territories. They are people with a big mouth and nothing behind it. It's exactly the same with the Romanians.
The Romanian rankers get a monthly pay of 1 mark. Yes, 1 whole mark. Their families and relatives at home get no support at all. The Romanian superiors may beat and flog their men. The officers are supplied by their own kitchen, as are the NCOs. The enlisted men get an inedible gruel cooked together from what the officers and NCOs don't want to eat. But all that has improved somewhat now that they regularly receive German rations.
Fall Blau began on the 28th of June, with the 4th Panzer Army and the Allied Hungarian Second Army advancing from the Kursk area towards the Don. Meeting little Soviet resistance, German forces made good progress, and by day 2 of the campaign had covered half the distance to their target, the Don at Voronezh. The plan originally called for the 4th Panzer Army to link up with the 6th Army and form the first pocket of the campaign. On the 4th of July, the two pincers met at Stary Oskol. But the encirclement was weak, and the bulk of Soviet forces managed to escape before the net could be closed. The Soviets' use of tactical retreats infuriated Hitler and made the first main objective of the offensive, the destruction of the Soviet troops in front of the Don, impossible to achieve. Realizing that the Red Army would not meet them in open battle, Hitler told Fedor von Bock that the advance should continue so as not to risk delaying the capture of the industrial city of Voronezh. In response, the 4th Panzer Army began its advance southwards towards the Don to capture the city. Voronezh fell to German forces on the 7th of July, after they had covered a distance of nearly 300 kilometers in just 9 days.
The tank spearhead must be very far away by now. You can no longer hear or see them. Last year it was different. Hopefully this year everything will work out so that we can finally get out of this bloody stinking Russia. I'm really fed up. You lose all standards in this cursed country. It's nice to get to know the dirty side of life, but we've got so used to it that we don't even notice it anymore, and we find a lot of things acceptable that we would otherwise deeply despise. And that is dangerous. How gladly I sacrifice my young years to our great and just cause. But in Russia you not only lose time, you also become stupid. And that is much worse.
On the 9th of July, the 1st Panzer Army and the 17th Army launched an attack on the Soviet southern flank between Izum and Taganrog. The two large German formations advanced as a southern pincer across the Donets towards the Great Don Bend, and together with the northern pincers of the 6th Army and the 4th Panzer Army, aimed to encircle the Red Army formations between the Don and the Donets. But again, the Soviet troops retreated faster than the Germans could follow, counterattacking the overstretched German lines wherever possible.
Please excuse the fact that I don't write as often as I did, but that is the way on an advance like this. The old men tell me that they have rarely been in the middle of such a mess as they were this time. We had to close the pocket in the east and had enemies in front of us and behind us. Those were critical days, and sometimes we were almost surrounded when the Russians broke through. The artillery shoots damn well into our village, and Rutters join in. Here the Russians often attack with tanks, and many lie mangled and burnt out by the roadside. Generalfeldmarschall von Bock was here yesterday and inquired about the situation. I was able to take photos of him.
5 days later, on the 13th of July, Fedor von Bock warned in a telegram that the destruction of essential numbers of enemy forces could not be achieved in an operation that would lead right into the heart of the enemy. Aware of the risks now faced by his most forward units that had become isolated by the speed of the advance, he wanted to pause the attack to eliminate Soviet forces in the immediate vicinity before continuing too deeply into Soviet-held territory. Hitler, still fully convinced that the Red Army was done for and on the verge of collapse, angrily dismissed von Bock from his position. For the troops on the ground, unaware of any disputes among senior commanders, the campaign continued on.
A secret order from Stalin found that Russians should not take a step backwards and should rather let themselves be beaten to death, as otherwise Russia would be lost. The Bolsheviks admit their considerable losses, and indeed, the Russians would rather be beaten to death than surrender. Everywhere they put up the toughest resistance, just like last year, but this time with the most modern weapons and equipment. In Tikhovo, a Russian prisoner somehow stole a pistol and shot 3 Germans with it. 1 Feldwebel dead, the other 2 seriously injured. They cut him down with a bayonet.
Certain that the main Soviet threat had been eliminated and that Russia no longer had the military resources needed to prevail, Hitler made a series of changes to Foul Blau. In Führer Directive No. 45, he announced, "In a campaign lasting little more than 3 weeks, the broad objectives I had set for the southern wing of the Eastern Front were essentially achieved. Only weaker enemy forces from Timoshenko's armies have managed to evade the encirclement and reach the southern bank of the Don." Stalingrad, once a secondary target, was now given the same priority as the campaign's main objective, the seizure of the Soviet oil fields. To achieve this, Army Group South was split into 2 smaller army groups, A and B. Army Group A was tasked with securing the original goal of capturing the Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus, whilst Army Group B, led by General Maximilian von Weichs, would attack towards the Volga, where it would smash the enemy force concentrated there and then occupy the city of Stalingrad. At the same time, rapidly advancing forces were to push southeast along the Volga to Astrakhan, cutting off this vital waterway. Tasked with leading the occupation of Stalingrad were the men of the 6th Army.
I'm taking a short break to write you a few lines. At the moment we're advancing south with the tanks. I think our goal for now is Stalingrad. At least that's what I've heard from the tankers. In this section the Russians are running so fast that we can't keep up with them on our wheels. And our daily marches are certainly not short, 50 to 120 kilometers. I have now driven 1,326 kilometers across Russia in my car. Once the water pump had to be replaced. That was the only repair so far. Very little, considering the vehicles are brand new and need to be broken in on Russian roads. Of the 20 vehicles we had in the group, 7 have so far broken down completely. 2 cars were attacked by 13 Russian tanks and set on fire. The drivers managed to escape in time. In general, it all comes down to fuel, which we will find in abundance in Baku. Ammunition is a minor issue, as there's not much shooting going on.
In command of the Sixth Army was 52-year-old General Friedrich Paulus, a career soldier. He had served in the First World War on both the Western and Eastern fronts. At the outbreak of the Second World War, he was promoted to Chief of the General Staff of the 10th Army, the unit renamed to the 6th Army after the victory over Poland. As Deputy Chief of the Army General Staff, he was responsible for deployment and operational planning against the Soviet Union, and in January 1942 was given command of the 6th Army. It was his first troop command, succeeding General Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau, a stout National Socialist who was responsible for numerous war crimes. It was under Paulus's command that on the 23rd of July, the 6th Army began its long march towards Stalingrad.
We are on our feet day and night. Wherever things get dicey, we are deployed. Either attack, defense in the main line of battle, and so on. At the moment we are in Slavyansk, facing west. The Russians have broken through somewhere. There's going to be a pocket. Our Stukas are blowing up the bridges over the Donets, not far from us, and the Russians are trapped. In general, we've had good support from Stukas and Panzers recently, but we still have to do most things on our own. They might call us the Queen of all arms, but I'll give you one piece of advice. If you do become a soldier, do everything not to join the infantry. It is the worst, and the casualties are enormous.
The German 6th Army was by far the most distinguished formation in the Eastern Theatre of Operations. It was regarded as an elite force, capable of carrying out almost any type of operation. But like the rest of the German army, it had become increasingly radicalized by Nazi ideology.
In the eastern region, the soldier is not only a fighter according to the rules of the art of war, but also the bearer of a relentless national idea and the avenger of all bestialities inflicted on German and neighboring peoples. Therefore, the soldier must fully understand the necessity of harsh but just atonement for the Jewish subhumanity. It has the further purpose of nipping in the bud any uprising in the rear of the Wehrmacht, which experience has shown were always instigated by Jews. Only in this way will we fulfill our historical task of freeing the German people from the Asiatic Jewish danger once and for all.
As the German war machine advanced deeper into the USSR, units operating behind the front lines conducted a series of special operations. These operations involved the murder of thousands of men, women, and children, in an episode that became known as the Holocaust by bullets.
They've made very short work of the Jews here, and that's how it should be done everywhere. Then we'd finally have peace from these wretched people. So far the Russians have not had any great successes, but have suffered fairly heavy losses. The prisoners taken in the last few days are completely exhausted again, as they're not doing well in the field positions in the heat. Russia, incomprehensible with your two faces, the humble, devout face, and the merciless mask of the devil.
Despite having lost millions of soldiers in the fighting, Stalin still had nearly 16 million men to call upon. In addition, the armaments industry, which had relocated to behind the Urals ahead of advancing German forces, was producing new tanks and aircraft every day. these numbers supplementing the already growing pool of vehicles and weapons supplied by the Americans and the British as part of the Lend-Lease program. On the German side, 1 million soldiers had been lost in the fighting, and of the tanks originally committed to Operation Barbarossa, only 1 in 10 was still operational. It was under these circumstances that Hitler ordered the simultaneous attacks on Stalingrad and the Caucasus. On the 29th of July, in what would prove to be a prescient message, Paulus warned Hitler's personal adjutant that the Sixth Army was too weak to take the city on its own. Despite these reservations, the men of the Sixth would march on.
The day before yesterday, we heard on the radio about the great advance in the Caucasus, and I would have liked to be there. Soon Stalingrad will fall, and I'll be there for sure.
On the 10th of August, advancing German forces began clearing the forest west of the Don of Soviet stragglers. The brutal fighting of the first day was inconclusive and continued through the night and into the next morning. Frustrated by the lack of progress, German troops set fire to the undergrowth to drive the Soviets out into the open.
This forest is truly a hell on earth, and it has cost us a lot of blood so far. It's easy to get in, but terribly hard to get out. The damned Ivan invites us in and then easily surrounds and ambushes us. An easy game in his position. Why don't we just take the forest, you ask? Our operations will ensure that he does not retreat without a fight. A major operation is planned in a few weeks' time with the aim of destroying the Soviets completely, and you can only do that if the enemy faces you in battle. But what will happen if you allow him to retreat and continue his existence? Dear Theo, with these lines I just wanted to give you an idea of our life here. At the moment, I am back at the observation post. I would not like to be anywhere else, as there is no better place to prove and show what is expected of a future officer. More patrols will be sent out in the future, and I will make sure that I am part of them.
With German troops advancing steadily towards the Don, Soviet forces launched a series of fierce counterattacks in an attempt to delay the oncoming forces. These attacks culminated in the Battle of Kalach, the sounds of which were recorded by a soldier in a German propaganda company.
Der Wind ist voll des widerlich süßen, unausstehlichen Verwesungsgeruchs und sein Atem stinkt aus verbrannten Dörfern her. Blut, Asche, verbrannte Balken und Sparren, das blieb übrig. Liegen die geborgten Wracks der abgeschossenen Flugzeuge. Dazwischen Tote und wieder Tote, wie sie die Wucht der Stukas zerschmetterte, das Artilleriefeuer erfasste und die Maschinengewehre hinmähten. Mit Freudengebrüll erfüllt für Sekunden die Luft, wenn über einen Panzer die Lohe der Explosion leckt, wenn die Traube der aufgesessenen Schützen zerbirst in fallende Körper und Glieder. Wieder springt die sowjetische Infanterie aus ihren Löchern, rollen Panzer vor durch die Täler, auf 100 zählen schon die gefallenen Sowjets vor den einzelnen Grabenstücken. Auf den mit Trichtern und Bombenkratern übersäten Hängen stehen schwarze Tankruinen. 5, 10 und mehr. Eiserne Saat allüberall. Versenkte Erde, verwundetes Leben. Und dieses alles erneuert sich Stunde um Stunde.
On the 21st of August, the German Sixth Army crossed the Don at Kalach with the 51st Army Corps and began the advance towards the outer suburbs of Stalingrad.
Main target bridge. In the process, Oberleutnant Ackermann is wounded. The next morning, the company and the supply train arrive. artillery fire on the village again. Around midday, the company departed behind 16th Panzer, which had broken through from the bridgehead to the Volga. Russian breakthrough on the road. Russian columns to the right and left. Heavy attacks by fighter planes, Stukas and bombers. The sky is black with clouds of explosions and flak from the Russians. Soon reached the railway line to Stalingrad, now advancing along it. In the evening, the corps rests in a Balka. Quiet night.
Advance units of the German 16th Panzer Division had already crossed the Volga at Rynok to the north of the city on the 23rd of August, but soon had to switch to defending against strong Soviet counterattacks from the north. On the same day, the Luftwaffe launched a massive air raid on Stalingrad, which on Stalin's orders had yet to be evacuated.
23rd of August 1942. Today was a big day for the Luftwaffe and tanks. Since the early morning, we have been over the top of the tanks again and again, helping them forward with bombs and machine guns, landing, refueling, attaching bombs, reloading ammunition and taking off again. There was a lot going on and things were moving forward splendidly. When we flew in, others were already coming back. Further and further ahead, we had to search for friend and foe. Once I was caught by a group of Russian fighters. I had already expended all my ammunition and Woletz's gun had jammed. 3 of them attacked me, 1 of them kept hanging behind me, and I could see the small flames licking from his machine gun barrels. I was fighting for my life and got away without a hit in my bird. You can't be too happy about something like that. In the evening, the tanks were already hard north of Stalingrad. There we got a lot of fire from the flak. I flew back along the route of advance. The cornfields and steppes were burning for miles. The columns were heading eastwards in a dense succession in enormous clouds of dust. Prisoners trotted westwards in large packs without guards. An image that I will always remember. An unforgettable image of war. The dawn. Huge wide sandbanks, many tributaries, a few strips of forest, and then again steppe. This foreign land is so vast, so boundless, and so lonely.
By the beginning of August, 40,000 Soviet civilians had been killed in German air raids. To areas across the Volga. But with such a large population, it was too late to evacuate Stalingrad completely. Some 75,000 civilians would be forced to remain in the city during the coming fighting. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe continued to bomb Stalingrad day and night, transforming the city into a sea of rubble.
25th of August 1942. Calm. The huge clouds of dust blown up by the squadrons taking off still hang over the field, covering everything and everyone with a grey layer. To land, you often have to circle over the airfield for up to 10 minutes before these clouds have cleared enough for you to see the ground as you hover in. The whole country is covered in a thick haze of dust, from which you only emerge into the clear high-altitude air at around 2,000 meters. Above the combat area, this layer of smoke and dust is so thick from the moving tanks and columns, from the fires and explosions, that one has great difficulties with orientation and spotting one's targets. Tanks crawling across the steppe, are they friend or foe? It is so difficult and so important to distinguish. Today we destroyed an anti-aircraft battery that was firing on us and it blew apart thunder and smoke. Our tanks down below often thank us by radio. Thank you very much. The attack was successful. Have a good flight back. Today we had a somewhat remarkable sighting. In the cloudless sky above Stalingrad, there was a single gigantic cumulus cloud, towering, white as snow, visible from afar, rising from a huge sock of black smoke. It was created by the warm air rising from the burning city, which cooled and condensed at high altitude.
Supported from the air, German ground forces arrived at the gates of the burning city at the end of the month.
The Russian is firing shrapnel over our positions. Impacts of artillery and machine guns on the hilltops. The scary howling, whistling and crashing. Around noon we have to evacuate 2 kilometers to the northeast. Russian artillery and flak pummeling the railway line. Yesterday, when we wanted to drive along the railway line, we were fired on immediately by the Russian flak, so that the splinters threw up the dust around the car. Tanks are already on the Volga. 2 men of the 1st Company were killed yesterday by Russian tanks, 1 seriously wounded. 4th Company, 1 dead. Now the Russians are shelling the road 200 meters from us. Russian planes are bombing the roads all around. Damn thing. In the afternoon, our Stukas finally arrive and bomb the Russians who have closed the ring around us. Night alert. Sleeping dressed and with rifle and hand grenades. Heavy enemy air traffic. Fighting moves further away. Towards Stalingrad, huge and thick clouds of smoke. Again, tank or artillery fire on the kolkhoz next to which we are standing. A cloud of smoke. Everything must be on fire.
On a ridge just a few kilometers from the heart of Stalingrad, the 6th Army and the 4th Panzer Army met on the 2nd of September and began preparing the offensive on the city centre. Surprised by the intensity of the fighting, German High Command ordered a temporary halt to the offensive.
Russians attack north of us. Heavy use of Stalin organs. The loud roar of battle. Russians have managed a partial breakthrough. Hope the pigs don't cut around our backs again. The men destined for leave, who were supposed to go to the rear today, are forbidden to do so as roads are impassable due to fire. The Russians' onslaught must be gigantic, because the noise of battle is getting stronger and stronger, and numerous formations of ours are being brought forward. Suddenly, Russian artillery starts firing into our Balka again. Damn pigs.
You wouldn't believe the hard fighting here. The Russians are defending themselves to the last and have dugout after dugout armed with steel cupolas. If you had seen the firing display in front of us in the last few days, in which we attacked day after day, from morning to night, with the heaviest weapons, the Stukas are at work around the clock. About 100 artillery pieces let loose their salvos on the positions from dusk till dawn. And anti-aircraft, anti-tank guns and other weapons are at work. The Russians have just dropped another 5 bombs close to me. The dirt hit my tent, and the air pressure turned off my lights.
Furious that Stalingrad had yet to be captured, and desperate to claim Stalin's city as his own, Hitler insisted that the city be taken immediately. The Russians, he declared, were at the end of their strength. In response, on the 13th of September, German forces launched a major offensive on the city.
Several times over Stalingrad, I strapped myself into my bird, freezing. Then the clouds cleared over the dawn, and I flew into the glare of the red rising sun. At first, it was still a little warm in the cabin from the engine, but at 3,000 meters above the target, there was a biting cold, so that we arrived frozen stiff. The flak, which had been pretty much dormant for the last few days, had become unpleasantly alert again. Russian fighters are also back in the area, showing little grit, but it's still not exactly cozy. The battle is now about blocks of houses, streets and railway stations. Thick black clouds of smoke make it difficult to see in the fall, with only burnt-out ruins in sight. The Russians tenaciously defend every pile of rubble, no matter how small. The attack slowly eats its way into the destroyed city. wind and rain showers all day. 5 times over Stalingrad, 7 hours in the aircraft, that's enough.
Helped by the destruction wrought by the Luftwaffe, Soviet defenders had turned every crater, house and factory into a fortress. German troops advancing through the ruins of the city found themselves fighting a war waged at point-blank range, in houses and cellars, with submachine guns, knives, hand grenades and pistols. They nicknamed this type of war Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. Casualty rates were enormous.
The Russian defends himself with unimaginable vigor. That's why we often can't move on until we've assembled a Stoßtrupp to clear such an obstacle out of the way. These are volunteers who have to clear the houses with all sorts of weapons. And this often leads to scenes that even father never saw in the last war. The main weapon is the submachine gun, followed by the pistol. But especially in the flats, action often has to be quick and spontaneous. And then bayonets, spades and knives are often used. One comrade, for example, hit Ivan in the shoulder with a spade so hard that it lodged in the bone and he was unable to remove it. Meanwhile, Ivan stabbed him in the thigh with a knife. Then another man finished him off with a pistol. It all happens so fast that you hardly know what happened to you. You can't be squeamish here, especially where the prisoners are concerned. The Russians behave bestially towards our people. They gouge out prisoners' eyes, slit their throats, and even cut off their genitals. So,
We are still working on Stalingrad here. It's taking longer than we thought. The day before yesterday, I was right in the center of the city, retrieving a gun that had been used in street fighting. We were within a kilometer of the Volga. But the town is completely destroyed. Nothing remains intact. Every house is converted into a stronghold and is defended to the last by the Russians, forcing us to destroy everything. Today there was another major attack. Again, aircraft were heavily involved. The Russians seem to be running a bit short of them. They don't come so often anymore. Today the Russian airmen made a fool of themselves again. 2 bombers collided during an attack and crashed. Nice thing, isn't it?
By the middle of September, German troops had managed to pin Soviet forces into a 9 by 3 mile strip along the Volga. German victory looked imminent, but in a desperate attempt to halt the German advance, Soviet reinforcements were rushed into battle, crossing the Volga under German bombardment and sent straight to the front. These forces managed to secure the western bank of the Volga between the Red October steelworks and Mamayev Hill. In response, 6th Army High Command shifted the focus of the attack to the industrial complexes in the north of the city. The fighting was particularly fierce around the 2 railway stations, the grain silo, Pavlov's house, Mamayev Hill, and the large industrial complexes in the north, with the Red October steelworks, the Barricades gun factory, and the Dzerzhinsky tractor factory. The Soviets had been blooded, but they had survived, and by the end of the month remained steadfast in their positions alongside the Volga.
The front is about 500 meters away from here. You can't imagine what's going on here in Stalingrad. A battle is being fought with the heaviest and newest weapons. I'm almost constantly under artillery fire. Most of the houses are destroyed. Whatever is not destroyed by direct hits falls down due to the air pressure. Yesterday a bomb crashed into the ground 5 meters from me. 5 horses were dead. I was even closer. My chest was badly compressed. The night before, an artillery strike almost next to the house I was sleeping in. The earth was churned up by funnels and impacts. The soldiers usually dig themselves into the ground at night. The streets are full of bomb craters. The telegraph lines lie broken and torn up on the ground. I tell you, it is no exaggeration. to call it the hell of Stalingrad. A terrible abomination of desolation. So far I have to thank my Lord God that he has led me through all the dangers in one piece. The earth trembles under the blows that are being struck. There are many wounded, many casualties. If only this could finally come to an end. Be glad and happy that you have nothing to... And when it's dark, the Russian bombers, which only come at night, are already buzzing. While Stukas work during the day, nothing will grow here anymore. Lord, give us the much-longed-for peace. Send me some cigarettes. I've taken up smoking.
We are still lying in the same old spot. The Russian is trying to relieve Stalingrad day and night from the north. His attacks are always repulsed in streams of blood. But all this is also costing us a lot. In Stalingrad itself, the other divisions also continue to advance. Every night the Russians bombard us with all calibers. Terrible fireworks. All around our trenches and bunkers there is a desolate field of rubble, crater after crater. But none of it helps the Russians. It's just a pity about all those comrades. Otherwise, I'm still doing well. I always look forward to receiving your kind parcels.
Russian casualty rates were enormous, but German losses were equally appalling. Aid stations set up in former Soviet hospitals just behind the front line received casualties 24 hours a day.
From Makijivka, a group of surgeons was immediately ordered to a war hospital in Stalino. The work goes on day and night without interruption. The hospital is housed in a modern surgical university clinic, the Voroshilov Institute, a favorite of Stalin's. The buildings are magnificent, but badly damaged by the war. They are willing, disciplined, but their unconditional faith has been shaken. Where is this going to lead?
For the German troops embroiled in the battle, there was no escaping the huge losses they were suffering. Almost everyone had lost a friend or comrade in the fighting.
Now I want to tell you where I am. Well, we've been back in the darkest corner of Stalingrad for 4 days now. We are lying just outside the town in our village of Olovka, waiting for the battery to be taken over. We are not in action, but there's still a lot of banging going on. Last night was indescribable. The planes hardly let us sleep a wink, but they didn't hit anything of importance. Stalingrad itself is in German hands. Only a factory site and a village on the outskirts of the city are still being defended tenaciously and doggedly. I've already been able to greet some of my comrades from our old battery. The battery is in position about 3 kilometers from here. Just think, our Harry was killed in action too, and another man from my gun. I said goodbye to him on the 3rd of September, wishing him all the best and good luck. I think I sent him the box of cigars on the 12th of September, and by the 9th he had already fallen. So he never got the parcel.
On the 30th of September, as the fighting neared its bloody climax, Hitler took to the stage to announce to the world his latest triumph.
Ganz letzten und größten Verkehrsader, nämlich der Wolga. Und hier wurde nun als Ziel gesetzt, jene Gegend, die zwischen dem Knie des Don und der Wolga selber liegt, und als Ort Stalingrad, nicht etwa, weil der Ort den Namen von Stalin hat, das ist uns gänzlich gleichgültig, sondern ausschließlich, weil dies ein strategisch wichtiger Platz ist. Und weil wir uns darüber im Klaren waren, dass mit der Ausschaltung des Dnepr, des Don und der Wolga als Verkehrsstränge für Russland ungefähr das gleiche eintritt oder noch Schlimmeres als für Deutschland eintreten würde, wenn wir den Rhein die Elbe, die Oder und die Donau verlieren würden. Denn allein auf diesem Riesenstrom der Wolga werden in 6 Monaten etwa 30 Millionen Tonnen Güter befördert. Das ist so viel wie im ganzen Jahr auf dem Rhein. Das ist abgeschnitten, und zwar schon seit langer Zeit jetzt. Die Inbesitznahme von Stalingrad, die auch abgeschlossen werden wird diesen Riegel nur vertiefen und wird ihn verstärken. Und Sie können der Überzeugung sein, dass uns kein Mensch mehr von dieser Stelle wegbringen wird.
For those listening from within bunkers and burnt-out houses within the ruins of the city, their Führer's words provided assurance that the Red Army could not continue their resistance, and the fighting would soon be over.
Yesterday evening, we listened to the Führer's speech here in an earth bunker. I often thought of you, sitting in your armchair, father with the inevitable pipe in his mouth, listening to the speech. But above all, I thought of the warm parlor, which we already miss here, because it has become very cold in the last few days. We have to drain the cooling water at night so that it doesn't freeze. We'll soon be home again, at least before the real cold sets in.
The day after Hitler's speech on the 1st of October, the Luftwaffe commenced a massive bombardment of the city, targeting Soviet positions in one of the most intensive raids to date.
5 sorties, 7 hours in the cockpit, blazing heat. Stalingrad burns under a rain of bombs and shells. You turn and dive in thick black smoke that literally blocks out the sun up to an altitude of 3,000 meters. On approach, the division transmitter below announces the target. In the target area A11, northwest, attack the large group of houses, strong enemy resistance there. It is extremely difficult to spot and hit these difficult targets in the thick smoke. The Ivans are different, but in this brutal battle, the only thing that counts is violence, fire, cunning without any rules, killing by any means. The primitiveness of these steppe people has its advantages. God knows, this is a battle between 2 worlds, and woe betide the West if it doesn't win.
By the end of October, Soviet forces held just 10% of the devastated city, but were still fighting on. Losing patience with his commander's inability to finish the job, Hitler ordered the formation of assault pioneer units, shock troops specially trained to knock down obstacles and fortifications, to finally smash Soviet resistance in Operation Hubertus. Despite his unhappiness with the campaign's progress, but confident that victory was within reach, Hitler returned to the podium to provide the German public with an update on his battle for the city.
Ich wollte zur Wolga kommen, an einer bestimmten Stelle, an einer bestimmten Stadt. Zufälligerweise trägt sie den Namen von Stalin selber, aber denken Sie nur nicht, dass ich deswegen dort losmarschiert bin. Die könnte auch ganz anders heißen, sondern nur weil dort ein ganz wichtiger Punkt ist. Dort schneidet man nämlich 30 Millionen Tonnen Verkehr ab, darunter fast 9 Millionen Tonnen Ölverkehr. Dort fließt der ganze Weizen zusammen aus diesen gewaltigen Gebieten der Ukraine und des Kuban-Gebietes, um nach dem Norden transportiert zu werden. Dort ist das Manganerz befördert worden. Dort war ein gigantischer Umschlagplatz. Den wollte ich nehmen. Und wissen Sie, wir sind bescheiden. Wir haben ihn nämlich. Es sind nur ein paar ganz kleine Plätzchen noch da. Nun sagen die anderen, warum kämpfen Sie da nicht? Weil ich kein zweites Verdun machen will, sondern weil ich das lieber mit ganz kleinen Stoßtrupps mache. Die Zeit spielt dabei keine Rolle. Es kommt kein Schiff mehr die Wolga hoch. Das ist das Entscheidende.
As part of Operation Hubertus, the Barricades gun factory and the tennis racket railway loop east of Mamayev Hill were designated as targets for the offensive of the newly arrived assault battalions. Other key targets were the Red October steelworks and the Commissar's house and pharmacy to the east of the weapons factory. On the 6th of November, the highly specialised and battle-hardened pioneer battalions arrived in the city and were sent straight to the front. Between the 9th and 14th of November, in freezing temperatures, the pioneers launched multiple attacks on the Soviet positions. Coming under near constant fire and drawn into brutal hand-to-hand combat, hundreds died in hellish conditions. Men falling in tunnels, underground galleries, cellars and factory buildings.
The ferocity of the fighting here surpasses anything previously experienced. The attacks around the tractor factory come one after the other, at any time of the day or night, surprisingly without artillery preparation. It often starts with a rain of hand grenades that are hurled towards us with the help of a slinging device, unleashing a veritable firestorm. Often the battle is decided with the flamethrower, the petrol canister. Ammunition becomes scarce in the ongoing battles. The decisive factor is man against man, with the bayonet, the pistol, grabbing each other by the collar, spitting in each other's faces, and hitting each other on the head with hand grenades. Death lurks around every corner, under piles of debris, in the dirt, on roofs, in the sewers, in steam boilers.
As a result of Operation Hubertus, the Commissar's house and the pharmacy were taken, but the factory complexes only partially fell into German hands. The attacks by the 305th Infantry Division and Pioneer Battalion 179 on the Red October steelworks were defeated, and Hall 4 remained in Soviet hands. Of the 3,000 German soldiers deployed, nearly 1,000 were killed in the fighting, and many more were wounded. After the operation, the decimated 5 pioneer battalions were combined into one battalion, and from then on deployed as regular infantry. With this failure, German forces lost their last chance to bring about victory before the onset of winter.
Dearest one, warm greetings from the hell of Stalingrad. We have been here for a few days in the midst of the fiercest fighting. So far, I'm all right. I'm now in command of a group, and I have a lot of responsibility. I've already lost 3 of my men, but we're not despairing. Like weeds, we are not easy to kill. Today is the 9th of November. I'm writing in the bunker and in the trench. We were alerted on the 5th. The Russians had attacked, but were brilliantly repulsed. We were under heavy artillery fire every day. I had my baptism of fire a few days ago. Nothing can make me tremble now, but I've lost a few good comrades in the meantime. From Friday to Saturday night, the Russians attacked our position again. I was in position with my machine gunner when suddenly hand grenades landed in front of our hole, and the attack began on the groups to my left. Our machine gun jammed after one burst because of the sand and dirt. But then we repulsed the attack with hand grenades. The Russians had suffered another serious defeat. I don't think you'd recognize me if you saw me now. 14 days without a drop of water to wash myself, without a shave. I squat once a week, and the dirt just peels off. My beard is almost as long as my father's. I'll shave it on Friday and send you a picture. By now we have been relieved and are in a cellar a little further back. Bombs and grenades are raining down, but we don't mind. We were just doing our laundry. It was already moving as if it was alive. We spent every spare minute hunting for lice. But please, do not send any sausages or meat products. Just biscuits, sugar, sweetener, cigarettes and a lighter, candles, flint, soap, razor blades, skin cream, tobacco pipe. Warm greetings for today. See you soon. Love and kisses from your Otto.
Despite the huge losses sustained in Operation Hubertus and the onset of winter, Hitler expected German attacks to continue.
Here in Russia, temperatures have already been measured down to minus 30 degrees, which we spent in the tent with a lack of wood, so that we can only heat it once in the morning, at noon and in the evening. Our NCO said it couldn't get any worse, and that it wasn't any worse last year. I tell myself that if it doesn't get any worse, I'll make it.
But it was about to get much worse. In the early hours of the 19th of November, after 3 months of heavy fighting and with 90% of the city under German control, all hell broke loose. With a barrage of 3,500 guns, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, the Soviets' long-awaited operation to encircle and destroy German troops in and around Stalingrad. And overrunning their positions. Acutely aware of the danger now posed to the Sixth Army, Paulus ordered German troops into blocking positions in an attempt to prop up the ailing Romanian forces and slow the Soviet advance. But just hours later, Soviet forces launched a second devastating attack. Advancing from their bridgeheads at Kletskaya and Serafimovich, 30 Soviet divisions smashed through the Romanian lines, scattering the ill-equipped men. By the evening, Red Army units had penetrated 35 kilometers into the flank of the Sixth Army. Disaster was imminent. Of course, German troops were quick to find a scapegoat for what had happened.
There are lots of Romanians here, all of whom have run away. Hundreds of them are queuing at our distribution points begging for some food. The bastards should be at the front. Now it is the German troops who can clean up for them. The mood among the Romanians had once even been quite good, he told me. But now they feel betrayed by their officers. He told me that in the unit in which one of his friends served, the commander and all the officers had driven away 3 days before the Great Russian attack on the 20th of November. And they didn't drive west, they drove east. When the Russians attacked, not a single officer had been there to take charge. Ammunition hadn't been delivered, and to make the few rounds they had count, their NCOs had told them to let the Russians come as close as possible before opening fire. Yet when the Russians came close, they had decided to throw away their rifles and to run away.
Just 1 day later, on the morning of the 20th of November, 2 Soviet armies broke through the front of the 6th Romanian Army Corps, south of Stalingrad. Here too, the resistance of the poorly equipped Romanians quickly collapsed, and German attempts to slow the Soviet advance failed. The southern pincer arm of the Red Army now swung unimpeded to the northwest, while the northern pincer arm pushed forcefully to the southeast. In the early hours of the 22nd of November, a Soviet advance group captured the undamaged bridge over the Don at Kalash and established a bridgehead on the west bank of the river. Somewhat prematurely, Paulus reported, "Army surrounded." On the afternoon of the 23rd of November, the northern and southern pincers of the Red Army met at the Sovietsky railway station near Kalash. The noose had been knotted. 260,000 German and Allied soldiers were now trapped in a pocket measuring 60 by 40 kilometers. In response, at around 10 p.m., the Sixth Army received a radio message from the headquarters of the Supreme Army Command. The Sixth Army is temporarily surrounded by Russian forces. I know the Sixth Army and its Commander-in-Chief, and I know that it will hold out bravely in this difficult situation. The Sixth Army must know that I am doing everything I can to help and relieve it. I will issue my orders in good time. Adolf Hitler. Paulus and his staff's immediate plan was to stabilize the fronts and then break out to the south. Even by then, however, the equipment and vehicles needed to do so did not exist. On the 23rd of November, Paulus summarized the bleak situation in a radio message to Army Group B.
Strongest attacks on all fronts. Some defeated, others still underway. Outcome still uncertain. Efforts are being made to clear individual armored breakthroughs. Promised air supply has so far failed to materialize and is unlikely to materialize due to weather conditions. Sufficient air supply is not considered possible even if the weather improves. Ammunition and fuel situation will therefore render the force defenseless in a very short time. Still consider a breakthrough to the southwest, east of the Don, with the involvement of the 11th and 14th Army Corps across the Don possible at present, albeit at the cost of material. Since receiving your radio message of 22nd of November evening, the situation has developed rapidly. We have not succeeded in closing the cauldron in the southwest and west. However, imminent enemy breakthroughs are becoming apparent here. Ammunition and fuel are running out. Numerous batteries and anti-tank weapons have expended their ammunition. A timely and sufficient resupply is impossible. The army will face annihilation in the shortest of time unless the enemy attacking from the south and west is crushed by combining all forces. This requires the immediate withdrawal of all divisions from Stalingrad and strong forces from the northern front. I retain full responsibility for this serious report. When I report that the commanding generals Heitz, von Seydlitz, Strecker, Hugo and Jennecke have the same assessment of the situation. In view of the situation, I ask once again for freedom of action. Heil, mein Führer.
For Paulus and his men, trapped in the ruins of Stalingrad, all that they could do was dig in and wait.
Perhaps you've all heard the news. An encircled armored division fights heroically for its freedom. Well, it was a lot worse. But it could have been even worse for us. No water, freezing cold, 8 days and nights without sleep. The Russians 100 meters in front of us. The Romanians abandoned everything and just fled. Our division stood alone in Great Russia. The battalion was surrounded and almost all officers and non-commissioned officers of my company were killed. Only the Hauptfeldwebel and 2 Unteroffiziere survived. Willy Bröckling has just been promoted to Unteroffizier and is no longer there, probably killed. The Russian beats and strangles all the prisoners to death. I can only tell you, they were cruel days and nights. Right now it's a mess here. On the 22nd of November, I had to lead a recon party. I only noticed the Russians when I was 15 meters from their positions. I quickly turned around, and by then it was already too late. An anti-tank shell of 7.5 centimeters hit my fuel tank and I ran out. Luckily the coffin didn't burn out, and I was able to tow it away under the cover of artificial fog. I thanked the good Lord that he had been with me again. Yesterday, a shell hit the ground 2 meters in front of me.
We will do everything we can to get you out. A promise is the only help Paulus receives. The Sixth Army was to hunker down on the Volga and, like the German forces in the Demyansk pocket earlier in the year, be supplied by air. At Demyansk, however, 96,000 troops were supplied over a distance of 30 kilometers, whereas at Stalingrad, 260,000 had to be supplied over 60 kilometers, an almost impossible task. Nevertheless, both the Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, and Field Marshal Erich von Manstein claimed that it would be possible to supply the Sixth Army by air. The men trapped in Stalingrad just had to trust and hope that the promise would be kept.
Dear parents and brothers and sisters, yesterday evening, Feldmarschall von Manstein sent the following telegram to our trapped little group. Hold on, I'll get you out. That really spoke to us. The mood of the troops is exemplary. Everyone is whistling and singing. Most of the sick recover quickly. Everyone is confident. Hold fast, I'll get you out. My fever is down. I'm awake for the first time today. But I'm still not fully recovered, so I have to run my unit from bed for a while. That works too.
Only on 3 days during December was it possible to fly the minimum required 350 tons of supplies into the Stalingrad cauldron. For the men who now found
Be done to fulfill the Führer's order. Major offensive by the enemy all along the line. Everything is under extreme tension. Do people at home realize the extent of these events? And we are still heading into winter.
date on the situation in Stalingrad.
Über die Schwere der Kämpfe, die überall und vornehmlich bei Stalingrad noch zu bestehen sein werden, darf das deutsche Volk sich keinen Täuschungen hingeben. Wieder einmal hat sich gezeigt, welche Massen an Menschen und Material den Sowjets noch immer zur Verfügung stehen. Unser Kampf gegen sie gleicht dem Kampf des Herakles gegen die Hydra, dem vielköpfigen Drachen der griechischen Sage, dem die vom Schwerte abgehauenen Köpfe immer wieder nachwuchsen, bis sie der Held mit Feuer ausbrannte. Wer wird in diesem gewaltigen Ringen die Köpfe der Hydra ausbrennen? Es ist die den Sowjets eigene Rücksichtslosigkeit in der Verfolgung ihrer Ziele, die sich hier als Feuerbrand auswirken wird, der das vollendet, was das deutsche Schwert anbahnt.
In the encircled city, the fighting, suffering and dying continued with unrelenting vigor. Soviet propaganda blasted the demoralized men of the Sixth Army from large loudspeakers with music and political messages. It was from these speakers that the Soviets taunted the German troops with the infamous message, "Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies. Stalingrad, mass grave," which was followed by the monotonous sound of the ticking of a clock and the so-called deadly tango music.
Alle 7 Sekunden stirbt ein deutscher Soldat. Stalingrad, Massengrab. Alle 7 Sekunden stirbt ein deutscher Soldat. Stalingrad, Massengrab.
With no certainty that they would ever be read, German soldiers continued to record their experiences in letters and diaries.
Most of our companies are only 30 to 50 men strong. Our line is patchily manned and we are waiting for replacements. We have moved as closely as possible to the Russians, as that way the Stalin organs can't hit us without hitting their own men. In some places, we are only a grenade throw away from them. During the day, we can't show our heads, as the Russians have snipers everywhere. Here we have started to conduct all movements and entrenching work at night. We use tent squares to drag the excavated soil towards the rear and spread it out far behind our position. While we have not received rations for 3 days now, replacements have arrived sporadically, but they are mostly older men from support units, badly trained and know very little about infantry service.
Dear parents, today I have the opportunity again to give you a sign of life from me. You will be worried about me as there is very little mail right now. But everything is sealed up, nothing can get in and nothing out. This time the damn Russian understood how to cut off all access routes, so that everything has now to be brought in by plane. There are already big undertakings underway to bail us out. Hitler will not let us down. For 14 days I've been in the front line again. During this time I didn't wash, not shave, didn't take off my boots. I am covered in lice, sleep in holes in the ground, in wind, rain and snow, and one often shakes like a little dog in the cold. In 14 days our beautiful Christmas celebrations are just around the corner, and once again I'm still in Russia. Who knows how much longer? One imagines how nice it would be to be in a warm room, to eat something good, and then a nice bed where one can really sleep in. Anyone who does not experience this here cannot imagine the deprivation.
It was Hitler himself who eventually gave hope to the trapped men of the Sixth Army when he ordered the creation of Army Group Don. Under the command of Erich von Manstein, Army Group Don was tasked with breaking the encirclement and freeing the trapped German forces in an operation called Winter Storm. The plan was to drive a wedge into the Soviet armies now encircling Stalingrad, creating a lifeline through which the trapped men could escape the frozen city. "Manstein will get us out," became a common saying in the cauldron.
The hour of attack has come. West of Stalingrad, German and Romanian forces have been holding their positions for weeks, surrounded by the Reds. They are waiting for us. We will not abandon them. Once again, the force of German armor will clear the way for grenadiers and infantry into the enemy's rear. Anything that opposes us will be attacked and defeated. There can be no hesitation when it comes to the fate of our comrades. They trust in your bravery and will break through the line of defense with you. Onwards to victory.
The attack of 4th Panzer Army Horde with 6th and 23rd Panzer Division from the Kotelnikovo area to link up with 6th Army is making good progress. The Russians are running like old times. 8th Flieger Corps has to take over the entire combat command in addition to the supply. Tonight, the orders were not ready until about 2 o'clock. But what can you do when things are going so well? A third of the way to the 6th Army has already been covered.
The main burden of the ambitious undertaking was borne by only 3 panzer divisions, the 23rd, 17th and the 6th. Of the 3 divisions committed, only the 6th Panzer Division was fully operational. It was with these forces that Manstein set out on his mission to alleviate Paulus and his men trapped in the city. In charge of 1 tank was veteran of Barbarossa, 26-year-old Oberleutnant Friedrich Wilhelm Zander.
The whole company is assembled on the road to Kotelnikovo. with the lead vehicles at the crossroads. Column upon column is hasting past our awaiting men, who are supposed to fall in line with the second wave. We roll across the road which is leading to Stalingrad and alongside which we are going to attack. Stalingrad. What a name. Stalingrad on the Volga. This is what it's all about. More than 200,000 comrades are trapped there, and they're about to see that we have not forgotten them. Stalingrad. Since Adolf Hitler underlined that name in his speech, we have not forgotten it. And now at this hour, during our march into the assembly area, the name becomes a beacon. The comrades at the Volga rely on us, and it will be our men who, during this morning on which the first rays of the rising sun gently touch the endless steppe ahead of us, will launch the blow to bail them out and free them from the Russian grasp. As we roll into the open steppe, it is 4 a.m. In 1 hour the attack will begin. I see how some of the commanders standing in the turret are looking towards the sky. I follow their gaze and see a rain of falling stars, briefly lighting up and then going out. Some of these heralds of eternity are drawing a fiery tale. I start counting them, and with everyone, I wish that I will always have the power and strength to carry on until I'm back home with my first child. These falling stars up there in the vast black sky show us once again how small and insignificant we are. 14th of December 1942, Kalmyk Steppe. We attack towards point 147, about 3 kilometers west of Werchne-Kumsky, when the light platoon reports enemy armor, T-34s near Sogotskot. We all mount up and behind our leader Dr. Beke, west of the road to Salvisky, and then turning east in a broad wedge formation towards Sogotskot. With 5th and 6th Company in the lead, we traverse a hill from the top of which we suddenly have an unexpected encounter. Matusek's voice grates through my headphones. "Some of them are turning their turrets!" And another voice. "Achtung, 2 of them are heading towards us!" Then a loud shout across the wavelength of the Abteilung. "Russians, fire!" In confirmation of this, there were 2 muzzle flashes ahead as the 2 Russian tanks which are closest to us open fire. A shell is howling over our turret, and I duck in and button up. They are only about 400 meters away now, but firing on the move, they couldn't even hit a barn door. And then the covering tanks of our companies open fire. The effect is spectacular. The 2 Russian T-34s are torn apart in violent explosions after a multitude of impacts. At ranges under 600 meters, our long 5cm guns are lethal, even for the T-34s. And with our higher rate of fire and our far superior training, the whole matter was over as quickly as it had begun. Half a dozen T-34s had turned around, early trying to escape, but these were quickly finished off by the 7.5cm tanks of the Heavy Company, whose guns could crack them like a nut at ranges of up to 1200 meters. Standing in my turret about 20 minutes later, I can see black smoke rising up from the wrecks of 36 Russian tanks. At about 1500 hours, we headed back to Werchne-Kumsky, where in the meantime another large group of Russian tanks, including several 52-ton giants, had attacked. They too had been repelled, and 8 had been destroyed. Our own losses had been low, 2 tanks lost and 9 damaged, most of which will be operational again in a few days. It is now 2100 hours, and I'm sitting in the turret of my tank. I don't know what else to write. Outside, the world seems to be on fire.
In the city itself, both Paulus and his subordinate Walther von Seydlitz-Kurzbach knew that time was running out. But whilst he was prepared to ignore the Führer's order and attempt to break out with the still mobile forces, Paulus refused to disobey his Führer. The Sixth Army was going nowhere.
17th December 1942. Bright clear winter day up to 1500. Tanks can roll, but enemy resistance has stiffened further. 17th Panzer Division has arrived in the front to the left of it. Tomorrow advance with combined forces to the north. In the fortress only rations until 20th of December. And because of fighters and flak, only Heinkel 111 combat aircraft can fly in. And at night, heavy bombing, so that even in the dark, the amount of transport is very small. It's a game on a knife edge. Will it succeed? No, it has to succeed.
On the 21st of December, Hitler finally authorized the requested breakout of Paulus's forces from the encirclement. But having previously requested an overview of the fuel still available to the Sixth Army, Wehrmacht command knew that the trapped troops only had enough to advance about 30 kilometers. Not enough to reach the armored spearheads which had become stuck 40 kilometers outside the city. Being informed of this by Manstein, Hitler revised the authorization he had just given and withdrew his permission for the Sixth Army to break out. With this, the narrow window of opportunity that might still have existed for the Sixth Army to escape was shut. For soldiers like Friedrich Wilhelm Zander, who had taken part in Winter Storm, high in spirits and full of confidence, failure weighed heavily.
28th of December 1942. Chernischkow. 1800 hours. I'm sitting in the orderly room of the schoolhouse in Chernischkow. Outside temperatures have dropped to -25 to -30 degrees Celsius, and there is an icy wind howling from the east. Everything outside is covered in a layer of ice, which is hard as crystal. But here in the house we are kept warm by 2 large iron ovens. The tank battle of Verchnikumsky, the thrust towards Stalingrad, everything is over. No day on which there wasn't any fighting. Light at first. So light that there was the faint hope that the Russian had not even realized that we were thrusting deep into his territory. An advance of nearly 40 kilometers in the first 24 hours. Then the inferno. Relentless Russian attacks, often at regimental strength and supported by armor, had to be repelled. No water, little food, the entire village in flames, our own casualties rising by the hour. Attack and counterattack, again and again. Only our Luftwaffe brought respite, when our Junkers 88s and Junkers 87s dropped their eggs on the Reds. The regiment now has only 22 operational tanks left. I'm told that in total we have destroyed over 200 enemy tanks, but still they kept on coming. We are hopelessly outnumbered and in many respects technically inferior. Superior leadership, morale, and training alone is not sufficient. Without ammunition, fuel, food, water, and spare parts, the Russians are wearing us down. The infantry here is already broken, and the sole appearance of a Russian armored car is enough to cause entire picket lines of tired, exhausted Lancers to fall back.
The men trapped in the city could hear the fire of their approaching comrades, but the orders from headquarters to hold positions and not break out were clear. And so the fighting, killing, and dying continued.
This letter is an attempt, and probably my last, to get in touch with you. We have been surrounded. The recent days were just horrible, and I can't find the words to describe them. Huge numbers of wounded are coming in, and they are all filing past me. I record their names, send them to the other room where they stand or lie like sardines in a tin. The very bad cases remain in another room, which we keep slightly heated. That room is always full. Some lie there, some are kneeling, others are wrapped in blankets. Another is moaning in pain and gets a morphine shot. I have to cool the feverish lips and gently stroke the heads of those young boys. Now tomorrow the first evacuations are supposed to begin with Junkers aircraft. I am so happy about that. In captivity, the fate of the wounded is even more terrible than what awaits us. Yes, I confess that I am praying for an easy death, and I pray that I will not be a disgrace to our Lord Jesus when the time comes.
On Christmas Eve, in a dramatic mix of war propaganda and Nazi ideology, the Deutschlandsender broadcasting service connected 12 radio stations in a special Christmas broadcast. From the Arctic Ocean to North Africa, from the Volga to the Atlantic coast, the German public would hear the voices of their fathers, sons and brothers who were spending yet another Christmas fighting and dying for the Reich.
Achtung an alle. Noch einmal sollen sich nun unter dem Eindruck dieser Stunden, die wir zusammen erlebten, alle Kameraden an den entferntesten Übertragungsstellen melden und Zeugnis ablegen durch ihren Ruf von dem umfassenden Erlebnis dieser unserer Ringsendung. Achtung, ich rufe noch einmal den Eismeerhafen Lillehammer. Achtung, ich rufe noch einmal Stalingrad.
Hier ist Stalingrad. Hier ist die Front an der Wolga.
Kameraden, jetzt in das schöne, alte deutsche Weihnachtslied Stille Nacht mit einzustimmen.
Diesem spontanen Wunsch unserer Kameraden fern drunten im Süden am Schwarzmeer schließen sich nun alle Stationen an. Jetzt singen sie schon am Eismeer und in Finnland. Und jetzt singen sie im Kampfraum von Rzeszow. Und jetzt schalten wir dazu alle die anderen Stationen, Leningrad, Stalingrad. Und jetzt kommt dazu Frankreich, kommt dazu Catania und singt Afrika. Und nun singt alle mit uns gemeinsam in dieser Minute das alte deutsche Weihnachtslied.
The recordings were real, but they had been taped in the days and weeks before. In Stalingrad, at least 65 German soldiers starved to death on the day of the broadcast. By the end of December, thirst, hunger and cold had become the worst enemy.
Since the beginning of December, the army has been conducting a large-scale starvation experiment. The portion rate set at the time, and still valid today, contain a quantity of food that is just under half of what a working adult needs.
When Soviet forces encircled the German Sixth Army, there were still 7 airfields under German control. All of them were located on the west bank of the Volga, between 10 and 28 kilometers from the embattled city center. For 2 months, these airfields presented the only lifeline to the trapped men. But as the Soviets' grip tightened and supplies dwindled, starving German troops resorted to ever more desperate measures, in their search for food.
Russia can be compared to a cold iron coffin, whose lid hasn't been soldered shut yet, because now and then there's time to ventilate the contents a little. Can you blame the boys that they have begun to mulishly teeter along? Desperation might be a great enemy of the soldier, but enemy number one was and is the hunger. It hurts so much that we search the dead Russians for bread and often find pea flour too, which we then cook in water without salt. You can imagine how hungry we are.
By the end of December, only 80 grams of bread could be issued per soldier. A few days later, it was down to 50 grams. The army had long since eaten its horses. Now, the men began slaughtering their dogs, which had been feeding on rats and corpses. On the 10th of January 1943, the Great Soviet Offensive to break the Stalingrad cauldron began. After bombarding German positions, 2 Soviet armies attacked and quickly overwhelmed the defenders. Within 10 days, the cauldron was reduced to about a third of its original size. An airlift presented the only escape route out of the cauldron, but even that wasn't a sure ticket. German airfields were now under near constant attack by Soviet fighters and artillery, making any landing by German plane incredibly hazardous.
I flew to Gumrak as Kette leader with 3 Heinkel 111s. The sight was perfectly recognizable. 5 Russian fighters attacked shortly before landing. They turned off after being shot at by light anti-aircraft fire. All the aircraft landed about 100 meters behind each other on the rolled runway. Bomb craters and wrecked aircraft to the right and left of the 50-meter wide runway made landing very difficult. When, after a few minutes, no personnel could be seen, I decided to roll up to a nearby road where lorry convoys were driving past. I unloaded the rations. The passing troops pounced on the unloaded loaves of bread and tinned food. An attempt to push the soldiers back at gunpoint was unsuccessful. I took 6 members of the Luftwaffe with me. I couldn't take any more, as Russian fighters were waiting over the field and their attack was to be expected.
The airfields at Basagino and Pitomnik were overrun by Soviets on the 14th and 16th of January. Supplies could now only be flown in via a makeshift airfield at Gumrak and the emergency airfield at Stalingradsky. On the 22nd and 23rd, they too fell to the Russians, and trapped German troops now had to rely on airdrops. By then, 12,000 wounded were lying untreated in the ruins of Stalingrad.
"22nd of January 1943, 1602. To AOK 6 to Army Group Don. After initial defense against massive enemy attacks, broad and deep breakthrough at noon on southwest front, after ammunition was spent there, Russian advance 6 kilometers in width on both sides of Oroponovo, partly with unfurled flags to the east. No possibility to close the gap. Retreat to neighboring fronts. These also without ammunition. Futile and unfeasible. Compensation with ammunition from other fronts no longer possible. Over 12,000 untreated wounded in the cauldron. What orders should I give to the troops who have no more ammunition and continue to be attacked with heavy artillery, tanks, and masses of infantry? Quickest decision necessary, as disintegration is already beginning at individual points, but confidence in the leadership still exists. Paulus, AOK 6, General Command Chief.
When the Red Army made another deep breakthrough on the 22nd of January, Paulus radioed the Supreme Army Headquarters, requesting permission to end the fighting. In a show of support, Manstein also asked that the troops be allowed to lay down their arms. But again, Hitler refused. A surrender of the Sixth Army is not possible from the point of view of honor alone. Paulus and his staff obeyed, but for others, there was no longer any use in delaying the inevitable. On the 25th of January, remnants of the 297th Infantry Division became the first German troops to surrender.
Now it really seems that the end is near. To be frank, I'm quite relieved that the mental strain and anxiety of the previous days has now come to an end. I still can't quite get my head around the fact that we really failed to hold out, but the Russians are too strong and our men are weakened by the cold and hunger. Here the mood differs a lot. One bears it with composure while some others don't. It is an interesting character study. Each of us wonders in which way he will come to an end. Well, I have your Mauser pistol from the Great War on my belt, still with the same 14 rounds. It has brought you luck, and maybe it will be beneficial to me as well.
A day later, on the 26th of January, Soviet forces advancing from the west and east met, splitting the Sixth Army into a southern and a northern cauldron. Paulus and his staff took up residence in the Wehrmacht department store in the city centre, where the newly appointed commander of the southern cauldron, Major General Fritz Rosker, had his headquarters. On the 28th of January, the northern cauldron was again divided. By now, there was absolutely no point in prolonging the fight. But, against his own judgment, Paulus still refused to surrender. On the 29th of January, he radioed Hitler,
"On the anniversary of your assumption of power, the Sixth Army salutes its leader. The swastika flag still flies over Stalingrad. May our struggle be an example to living and future generations, never to surrender, even in the most hopeless situation. Then Germany will be victorious."
Hitler expressed his gratitude by promoting Paulus to Field Marshal, the Commander-in-Chief of the glorious Sixth Army, the heroic defender of Stalingrad. The message could not have been clearer. An officer of this rank had never been taken prisoner. Hitler was expecting Paulus to take his own life. On the same day, an address to the German people was broadcast from the Hall of Honor in the Reich Aviation Ministry in Berlin. As the Führer was deliberately never to speak in connection with a defeat, the second man of the Reich, Göring, was to inform the German public of the unfolding catastrophe.
Wird dies einmal der größte Heroenkampf gewesen sein, der sich jemals in unserer Geschichte abgespielt hat. Was dort jetzt unsere Grenadiere, Pioniere, Artilleristen, Flakartilleristen und wer sonst in dieser Stadt ist, vom General bis zum letzten Mann, wer da jetzt kämpft gegen eine gewaltige Übermacht, um jeden Block, um jeden Stein, um jedes Loch, um jeden Graben, immer wieder kämpft, ermattet, erschöpft. Wir kennen ein gewaltiges, heroisches Lied von einem Kampf ohnegleichen. Das hieß der Kampf der Nibelungen. Auch sie standen in einer Halle von Feuer und Brand, löschten den Durst mit eigenem Blut, aber kämpften und kämpften bis zum Letzten. Meine Soldaten, die meisten von euch werden von einem ähnlichen Beispiel in der großen, gewaltigen Geschichte Europas gehört haben. Wenn auch damals die Zahlen klein waren, so gibt es letzten Endes doch keinen Unterschied zur Tat als solcher. Wenn ihr denkt, Jahrtausende sind vergangen und vor diesen Jahrtausenden, da stand in einem kleinen Engpass in Griechenland ein unendlich tapferer und kühner Mann mit 300 seiner Männer. Stand Leonidas mit 300 Spartiaten. Zu seinem Stamm, der wegen seiner Tapferkeit und Kühnheit bekannt war. Und eine überwältigende Mehrheit griff immer wieder aufs Neue an. Der Himmel verdunkelte bei der Zahl der Pfeile, die abgeschossen wurden. Auch damals war es ein Ansturm aus dem asiatischen Osten, der sich hier an nordischen Menschen brach. Gewaltige Mengen von Kämpfern standen Xerxes zur Verfügung. Aber die 300 Männer wichen und wankten nicht. Sie kämpften und kämpften einen aussichtslosen Kampf. Aussichtslos, aber nicht in seiner Bedeutung. Und dann fiel der letzte Mann. Und in diesem Engpass, da steht nun ein Satz. Wanderer, kommst du nach Sparta, so berichte, du habest uns hier liegen sehen, wie das Gesetz es befahl. Es waren 300 Männer, meine Kameraden. Jahrtausende sind vergangen. Und heute auch einmal heißen, kommst du nach Deutschland, so berichte, du habest uns in Stalingrad liegen sehen, wie das Gesetz, das heißt, das Gesetz der Sicherheit unseres Volkes es befohlen hat. Und dieses Gesetz trägt jeder von euch in seiner Brust. Das Gesetz, für Deutschland zu sterben, wenn das Leben Deutschland diese Forderung an euch stellt.
With Soviet troops now outside his command post, Paulus sent his final message shortly before 8 o'clock on the 31st of January. Despite Hitler's wishes, he would not kill himself. Across the city, German troops readied themselves for the end.
Now, you wanted to know what the end was like for us. The Russian artillery fired non-stop from every barrel. All hell broke loose. With us was everything that could still carry a rifle. Everything from the baggage train, cars and truck drivers, tailors and shoemakers. We only fired when the Russians attacked. All of a sudden there was dead silence. We looked out of our holes. Then they arrived in droves with T-34 tanks. Anyone who still managed to crawl out of the holes was caught by the tank tracks and crushed. The snow turned blood red. That was the end of our division.
For weeks, Paulus had obeyed all of Hitler's orders to hold out, rejecting several offers of surrender from the Red Army. But now, in a final act of defiance, Paulus disobeyed Hitler and authorized Major General Fritz Roska to negotiate a surrender with Soviet forces. For exhausted German troops,
wird von einer Flak-Division der deutschen Luftwaffe, 2 rumänischen Divisionen und einem kroatischen Regiment geteilt, die in treuer Waffenbrüderschaft mit den Kameraden des deutschen Heeres ihre Pflicht bis zum Äußersten getan haben. Unter der Hakenkreuzflagge, die auf der höchsten Ruine von Stalingrad weithin sichtbar gehisst wurde, vollzog sich der letzte Kampf. Generale, Offiziere, Unteroffiziere und Mannschaften fochten Schulter an Schulter bis zur letzten Patrone. Das Opfer der Armee war nicht umsonst. Sie starben, damit Deutschland lebe.
This is the last letter I will be able to send to you. Seems we have run out of luck this time. When you receive it, your son will be gone. I mean, he won't be in this world anymore. We are all very serious about that and will continue the fight for our beloved Heimat, my beautiful hometown, for my family and the Führer.
The merciless fight continues, and our good Lord is helping the brave. Whatever God's providence will decide, we only ask Him for one thing: the power to persevere. One day people shall say of us that the German army has fought in Stalingrad like no soldiers of the world have fought before. To pass this spirit on to our children is the duty of the mothers.
Defeat at Stalingrad ended the myth of German invincibility, marking a pivotal shift in the war. Only 6,000 ever returned home.
Kummer und Sorge